A lot of tea
I
drinkers
made as
around
much
here.
tea as could fit into the container.
Well, that's good. That's great. I'm delighted to hear our tea consumption is increasing. That's good for our Anglican bona fides. All right, good. Let's get started here. Good morning. Why don't I open up with a word of prayer, and then I'll give a little overview of what we're going to be talking about today. Let's pray. Gracious Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the opportunity that we have to come together, to worship you, and to think about you and how you revealed yourself to us and how we have been able to be invited into the mission of the church, the mission of the work that you are doing in this world. We ask for your help right now as we think about how this happens in very pragmatic ways and practical ways through our giving and through how this particular parish operates. Bless us as we think together about how we can serve you better going forward. We praise in Jesus' name. Amen. So in this session here, Aaron Hill and I are going to be talking, mostly Aaron Hill, we'll be talking a little bit about how church finances work and what it is that sort of like it goes into running an operation like a parish of our size and stature, what have you. It's really awesome to be at a parish like this because we have like literal experts in various fields. You know, we've got Brad Cathy, our literal expert in design, who designs many of our bulletin covers. We've got many musicians here who are literal experts in music who kind of contribute in so many ways. And I think Aaron is a literal expert in church finances and what have you. This is Aaron's day job, and we're so fortunate, I think, to be able to have his wisdom and experience and knowledge on display for us right here, totally for free. I'm sure this would cost like thousands of dollars to get no, not right, hundreds of dollars,
Maybe
tens of dollars. You know, a cheeseburger for the dollar.
I'll put together an invoice.
It would cost something. It would cost something to have a consultant of this sort of like a caliber and stature to come here and do an analysis of our church finances. But we get to do this for free because Aaron is one of our parishioners and has been, as a member here at our parish, and has been long kind of helping us out with some of these things as well. And he gave a little bit of a version of this talk to our vestry back in the fall, and I think it was really helpful for us as we were thinking about just the finances of the parish and what have you. I'm going to come in and talk a little bit more about some things like how do we do things here at All Souls. So quick little agenda here. Aaron's going to talk a bit about the relationship between attendance and budget, talk about some of the decisions that any church or organization has to make in terms of determining the ratio of like giving to care, that is how much we receive to how much we can actually give to you all in terms of spiritual and personal benefits, what have you. And then give us a little bit of analysis here of All Souls as current calculations as according to our budget in the last year or so. Talk a bit more about some of the constraints or the strains that might put on us and how we're able to do ministry and work here. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more just about like who does what here at All Souls, and that's where that little ministry leaders handout will come into play. You don't have to memorize this or refer to this in specificity, but I'd love just kind of putting in front of people just this vast information of who does what here at this parish, and it's all right here in very fine print. So get your magnifying glass out for that. But just wanted to print it on one piece of paper, so we weren't printing out reams of paper. And then talk a bit about what affects giving at a place like this, and then talk about the opportunity that we have for moving forward in this. So I think that's a good overview, and I'll just hand it off to Aaron to talk about this first point. Am I using this mic? You get your own.
Yeah, I think we're both on at the same time. So.
Great, thanks.
So I showed you guys this chart last week as a teaser, and this is showing the relationship of, so attendance is the x-axis down here on the horizontal axis, and then the vertical axis is budget. And then I tried to mention that this is a logarithmic scale, so it's compressed at higher scales. And that's to help us see that essentially there's this river of church growth. As churches get bigger, their budget increases at a very consistent, predictable rate. Okay? And so this allows me in my day job at Church Salary to say, well, if I know one piece of information about a church, I can take a pretty educated guess at other pieces of information about your church. If I know your size, I can guess your budget. If I know your budget, I can guess your size. There's not a whole lot that's sort of new under the sun. And what we can do is we can actually compress all of this information sort of along this axis, and we can look at a distribution chart. So this is what per person giving, per person budget looks like in the US. So there's two ways you can measure this. If we all pool our finances together and we have our total giving at the church, if you divide total giving by the number of people, that includes youth and teenagers because we have to care for them. You get a per person giving number. Churches then have to take that decision of total giving and they have to turn that into a spending commitment or a spending goal. And so you could talk about the budget divided by the size. That's the amount of money that we can spend on each person in a given year. And so what you can see is All Souls is on the backside of the curve, okay? So we are at or below the 25th percentile in terms of our per-person giving, our per-person budget. So let me actually just click through to this graph here, see if we can sort of zoom in. So the 25th percentile is $1,838 per person, and depending on how you crunch the numbers, going all the way back to, I don't know, 2016, 2015, I don't know how old those spreadsheets are, but
2017, I think.
yeah, 2017. Going back all the way to 2017, we're pretty much within this range of between $1,600 and $1,900 per year. What this means is, as we add more people to the church, if nothing changes about that per-person giving ratio, then our budget and our attendance are going to stay at roughly the same ratio, right? We'll add more people and our budget will grow, but the relationship between the two of them is going to stay pretty consistent. The median is $2,553, so you can see how far away we are from the midpoint. The average is $2,816, and that's because there's this long tail of churches with much higher giving. The other side of the distribution curve, the 75th percentile, ignore that that says 25th, the 75th percentile is $3,529. So there's basically the middle 50% of churches between us and the other side of the curve. There's about $2,000 per person between us and the other side of the curve. So that's how far below the average we are at All Souls. Okay, let me go back here. Okay. So what ends up happening at churches is there is essentially a series of decisions that every church has to make, and these aren't arbitrary. They're all related to one another, and you can actually quantify this with a mathematical formula. This is just math. This is how churches work. It's like the theory of relativity or the law of gravity or something. You can't change it. And so I can basically model where churches sit in terms of all the things that we're going to talk about in just a second, mathematically. And so there's no cheating. There's nothing special about All Souls in that respect. It's just where you sit with regard to other churches is driven by a couple things. So let's talk about that. So there's essentially 4 decisions that every church has to make. The driving force behind everything is how much does the congregation give, and then how much can they spend collectively. So there's some churches that have like a coffee shop in the foyer. They have other sources of income in addition to giving. But most churches, it's giving is what drives spending. And even when we sort of spend above that, we're usually spending giving that we've saved up from previous years, right? And so that's the driving force behind everything at a church. The second decision that we have to make, and this at our church, this is the vestry that makes these second and third decisions, is how much do leaders set aside to spend on staff expenses, right? We have a budget that we set aside, but we don't spend all of that on staff. So we're going to say, well, how much of that can we afford to spend to pay our staff? The third decision is, okay, well, how much are we going to pay each of the individual employees, right? We've got this pool of money that we've set aside, but we've got to figure out how we're going to pay Father James and David and Jennifer and Sydney and everybody else that's on staff. And that can be turned into an average, which we'll talk about in just a second. All of this is driving towards what I would say is the core obligation of a church. The thing that differentiates us from just a random group of people that are meeting together in a public park. You know, we have a building, we have commitments, we have employees. The thing that differentiates us is that we have to hire staff to coordinate care for the congregation, right? We all have day jobs. We have to pay somebody to make it their day job to coordinate the care for the congregation so that we have a worship service and all the stuff that happens. And so what happens is, as churches grow in size, church leaders are obligated to hire staff and increase hours for existing staff to maintain a similar level of care for the congregation. Nationwide, that average looks like 55 people for every 1 full-time equivalent employee, okay? The church's ability to meet that obligation is driven by the giving level of the church. There's actually, again, I can show you a curve, and where your giving level is determines the staffing level at your church, okay? So we'd actually turn this into a model. At the top, we've got our giving level. Over on the side, how much are we going to set aside of our budget? The bottom, what are we going to pay each of the staff members? And then that drives the staffing level at the church. And you'll notice the arrows aren't just going sort of counterclockwise from giving to staffing. They're all interconnected. And that's because each of these decisions impacts the other decisions at the church. So one of the things I've noticed is Catholic churches tend to have a very high staffing ratio, and that's because they have very low giving. And that means it's very easy for people to come into the church, not get attention from the staff, and then go right out the back door. And it's also harder for the staff to disciple them. And so their giving level doesn't change, and so it sort of creates a self-reinforcing cycle at churches, okay? Yes, Brad?
55 regular members, parishioners, members.
There's lots of different ways to quantify it. At Church Salary, we ask churches to come up with an active average attendance number, the number of people that are actively participating in the church in the last 3 to 6 months. At All Souls, we've got sort of two numbers that Father James and I have been working with recently, and I'll go over those in just a second. So we can turn these into, yeah, Dick?
Yeah, I just, when you get the number of people here, how would you get that number? You said it's children, everybody.
Yes. So Father James and some other people are tracking attendance on a daily basis, both in here in the worship service and then downstairs for children. And
Do you want our numbers now?
now we'll get to them in
Okay.
just a second. But yeah, so those numbers are being tracked, and then we do our best to try and average them. I actually came up with a formula to kind of weigh our term season when we have more people here and college students, and then our summer where there's fewer people and people are out of town and on sabbatical and stuff like that.
Amount of money, is that just everything that comes in?
Yes.
Or just things that, I mean, like what we spend on missions and things like that?
So I'm using, the numbers I'm going to use in a second are the total budget that we projected to spend in 2025.
Income's only from you all.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
a little bit of interest on a bank account.
A little bit of interest on a bank account, and then maybe we plan to spend more on savings, but then people give more, and so it's always a guess. We can turn the giving level into, we can just quantify that as metrics. So our total budget, our attendance, the ratio between them, our per person budget. We can then quantify the percentage, and the term that we use at Church Salary is payroll percentage. So just divide your payroll budget by your total budget. That's going to give you a percentage number. We'll talk about what that is at All Souls in a second. On the bottom, we can turn our pay level into a metric that we call a ratio called average employment cost. So this is how much does it cost to pay for one full-time equivalent employee on average in a year, okay? And I'll show you what that number is for All Souls in a second. And then our staffing level. So the other sort of metric over here in the corner is full-time equivalent staff size. FTE, or full-time equivalent, is just a way to quantify an individual employee or a group of employees in terms of increments of 40 hours per week, okay? So if we add up all of the hours that All Souls was paying for at the end of 2025, it's 141 per week. If you do the math, 141 divided by 40 is 3.525. So All Souls has 3.525 full-time equivalent employees as of the end of this past year. Okay, so let's talk about All Souls' current numbers here. So this is what our numbers look like that I put in. Again, we could pick different numbers for budget and attendance. We could even change the payroll budget number to say, well, this is what we actually spent versus what we projected to spend. But the ratios are pretty much the same, okay? So I'm actually going to click through to the Church Salary website, and I'm going to show you guys something pretty cool that I built. So we can actually quantify all of these numbers, and I can show you a graph of the size and shape of All Souls. So the dotted line that is a square right there is what an average similar church would look like. So a church with 228 people, if we were going to graph their size, their total budget, their payroll budget, and their staff size, they would be sitting, in a perfect square on that dotted line, okay? As you can see, All Souls is not on the dotted lines anywhere, okay? So the first thing we can do is we can look at our attendance, and what the model says is our size is about 33% larger than we would expect for a church with a budget of $425,000. So if you came to me and said, hey, my church has a budget of $425,000, based on what I know of average giving, I would guess that your church had 171 people, right? But because our church has 228, what that means is we're sort of oversized relative to our budget by 33%, okay? You can see how this line is tilted down, right, because our giving level is below average. And what we can see is for a church of our size, the per person budget we would expect to have would be $2,486. We are more than $600 below that on a per person basis, okay? So that's not, every single person we have $600 less to spend than an average church. In terms of our total budget then, if you came to me and said, my church has 228 people, I would guess that you have a budget of $567,000, not 425, right? So that's a big difference. So we are 25% smaller in terms of our budget relative to our size. That's driving a lot of the decisions that we make here at the church. So one of the second decision that we have to make is, okay, well, how much of this $425,000 are we going to spend on our staff to pay Father James and David and everybody else that's on staff? Right now, it's around 57.6% of that total, and that is 3.6 points higher than the nationwide average. So right now, the nationwide average is around 54%. And so what we're doing is because our giving level is lower, we're stretching our payroll budget higher than a church of our size, okay? We're essentially trying to compensate for our lower giving. And that means we have less money to spend on ministries, less money to spend on missions, less money to spend on all the stuff that we want to pay for. So that's where our payroll budget is coming from. It's a little bit larger than we would expect for a church of $425,000. And then down here, our average employment cost. So this is, if you just take your payroll budget and you divide it by your staff size and full-time equivalent employees, that's how much the church is spending in a given year on average for 40 hours of work. At All Souls, at the end of end of 2025, that was $69,401 for every one full-time equivalent employee on average. That's over $4,000 less than the nationwide average. So we are paying our staff less on average than the nationwide trend. And I would even go so far as to say, because I happen to know this, I know what other churches in the Wheaton area are paying their staff, we're far below our peers in the local area. In fact, there's a church in Wheaton that has average employment cost that's more than double ours. I might say they're overpaying their staff, but that's a different discussion. So our full-time equivalent staff size is a little bit larger than I would expect, and it's a little bit larger because we're spending more of our total budget on staff than average, and we're paying everybody a little bit less money, right? So we're stretching our payroll budget, and then we're skimping on what we pay, and that allows us to hire more staff than I would expect for a church of our size with our stats. So that's a lot of analysis. Let's talk about the sort of implications of that. So what happens is, because all of this is deterministic, it's mathematics, there's no escaping it, what happens is churches have different ways that they can try and fight gravity. You can try and fight the forces that are going on in your church, and there's 4 ways that happens. So the first one is churches just do less stuff, right? If you have to spend more of your total budget on payroll than the average church, then you have to do less ministry than the average church, right? There's just no way around it. Oftentimes, it also means there's less organizational complexity because you have fewer paid people to help run and administer things, and so things just have to be simpler, right? The second thing that you can do is you can expect more of staff. You guilt staff into donating hours. We're going to pay you to work 15 hours a week, but the amount of time it takes you to do the work that we've given you to do is 20 hours or 22 hours, right? And this applies not just to part-time employees, but full-time employees as well. We're going to pay you, Father James, for 40 hours a week, but we're going to expect you to work 55 week in and week out. And so that's how you sort of stretch your payroll budget if you don't have the money to pay people. The other thing you can do is you can just stretch pay thinner, right? If you pay everybody a little bit less money on average, that leaves you a little bit more money to hire more people or expand people's hours. So you can sort of skimp on what you pay people and then kind of stretch that money a little bit further. And then the fourth thing is you can increase your volunteer hours. And I would say this is sort of a mathematical certainty. If we give less, as members, we have to work more because we can't pay people to do the work that has to get done to run the church, and so we have to fill in the gaps. And Father James is going to quantify that in just a second. So I'm going to hand it off to Father James real quick, but the answer to how is All Souls fighting gravity, I would say we're probably doing a little bit of all of the above.
Which would be to ask the parishioners to give more money.
That's what we're doing right now.
Brilliant, Brad. That's fantastic. Wow. Gosh. I think you're the rector now.
We did not coordinate that ahead of time.
Fantastic. What a great idea. I just wanted to highlight a little bit, and thanks for that, Aaron, for this right here. Just in the ways that I have seen us here try to fight this kind of gravity. As Aaron put it here, it's sort of like the kind of a inevitability to how these ratios sort of work out. So what has All Souls done in the last 3.5 years as me being rector, and from my observations too, for a long time? The do less one, I think, is actually kind of less of what we do. I think actually we do more than an average church of our size ought to be doing. When you look at the organizational complexity of things like on this ministry leader chart here, and the kinds of talented people we have, both paid and unpaid, who are starting ministries and participating in various things right around here, I think we do far more than a church of our budget and even of our attendance should be doing, because we've got so many competent people who are running wonderful things here. So I think we've done less than maybe a church in our situation would do. But I also feel like there are other areas that still we don't do quite as well. And we have been making decisions as a staff and as clergy and vestry to not do some things that maybe we want to do, or maybe even we feel like we should be doing, that would kind of expand our ability to serve you all as well as serve our neighbors in and around here. So we are restricted, I think, in number one, and that is, a result of some of the calculations here as well. Expect more of staff and stretch pay thinner. I'll show in a little bit here how much we rely on volunteer work, and not just like volunteer work like you, but some of our quote-unquote staff give lots of unpaid hours, and many have done this for actually quite a long time. And I don't want to put Jennifer on the spot or what have you, but we might remember that Jennifer worked almost full-time for our parish for free for almost 2 decades. That is hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars that is being saved over the course of 2 years for this particular parish. And I think in some ways All Souls has gotten used to people giving more, donating their time and energy, what have you, even at such high quantities of 20, 30, 40 hours a week. Aaron mentioned a little bit about stretch pay thinner. I think that's one that comes up as well. And then finally, number 4, which is increase the volunteer hours. And they talked a little bit about organizational complexity. That's been a particular challenge, is how do we operate as a church with an organizational complexity that is so dependent on volunteers giving 2 hours a week, 3 hours a week, but that's managerial time that has to take place. It's a lot more challenging to manage 14 people giving 2 hours a week than one person giving 28 hours a week or what have you. So those are kind of some of the ways in which All Souls has been engaging with fighting the gravity that have been challenging. But I thought just maybe to kind of give a snapshot of what goes on here. You've got the ministry leader chart, but I think it's good for the members of the parish as well as everyone to know kind of who does what around here and for how long did they do it. So here's our paid staff. And I mean, you can just look at the materials there. You've got myself and David. We're the only full-time employees here. David is our curate for youth, college, and young adults. Of course, he came on in the summer of 2024. We're the only full-time employees of this parish. When I started in 2022, I was the only full-time employee. In fact, I was the only employee at that point. We actually had to start paying anybody at that point as we tried to figure out how to do ministry in and around here. Jennifer Merck, as you know, both was our parish life facilitator, and then new here in 2026 is her role as director of safeguarding. That's a new role, and we kind of added on 5 hours a week there. Kind of hard to quantify what that was all going to be, but in terms of just her compensation, she is salaried at 25 hours a week, although this is what I will say, I don't know how often Jennifer works 25 hours in 1 week. And it depends a little bit on the week, I suppose, but there are certainly times when that's a far cry from what it is that she's doing on a regular basis. Dana's just hired here officially on January 1st as our children's ministry director, roughly at 15 hours a week. Now, these are all salaried positions, Jennifer's, myself, David, of course, Rob, and even Sydney, which means there's a lot more flexibility in how much time they're giving over the course of the week. We've tried to target compensation based on what we think is going to be taking place, but That's not always the case. And again, it can vary by season or it can vary by week. I'm quite sure that Sydney works way more than 8 hours in the lead up to Holy Week as she's producing a bajillion bulletins and rehearsing. And there's plenty of times when like I was in the building and her, it's like the rector and the organist, she's practicing, I'm setting stuff up here on Holy Monday or whatever and Holy Week where I'm like, you've been here like 8 hours in 3 days, haven't you? Not just in 1 week. But again, it's a salary position that does spread across the course of, of the year. Mike Bergstrom is our only hourly employee, so he gets paid on an hourly basis, mostly for bulletin production, for bulletin printing. He also checks our mail and does a little bit of odds and ends around it for us, but he gets paid on a per hour basis. I'm going down to Father Rob, salaried again at 10 hours a week. I think Father Rob puts in way more than 10 hours a week in the work that he does here in the parish. I think Sunday morning would wipe out half of that for Rob if that were all that we were paying for him on a per hour basis. And the rest there too. I mentioned Sydney, both our organist as well as administrative support. She's doing a lot with the bulletin production process and ushering that through and the like. There's our paid staff. We also have what I would call unpaid staff. And this was something I tried to kind of figure out in the first couple of years here. Like, how do we consider the people who give a lot of time, but we don't pay them? And how does that relate to whether or not we consider them like staff? And it came up, I think it was in the winter of 2024, November 2024, when I was like, oh, I've got a staff. We should have a Christmas party or something like that. We should go to lunch for Christmas, shouldn't we? Well, who do I invite to the staff Christmas party? That was kind of like a conundrum, but it forced some organizational thinking about who it is that I invite to the Christmas party. And so we took our ministry leaders as the primary ones. So if you look at the gold here on the sheet, those who are in gold, or roughly we consider on the ministry leader side here, is like our staff, paid and unpaid there. So you can see, of course, Deacon Mary Baker, who's been here for a long time, as assisting minister for community formation. Roughly, she's putting in volunteer 10 hours a week. Some weeks that's going to be far more. Some weeks that's going to be less. That's a little bit quantified over the course of the whole year. Ann McCarthy as well, our licensed lay minister for care. That's kind of what she does on a ministerial side, but she also puts in a ton of work on the finance team. And that's, you see over here on this side here where it says the whole finance committee. Jim Bolton, Teresa Hoffner, and then Ann McCarthy put in a bunch of time helping us work through all the financial stuff here. I mean, Teresa comes to many of our vestry meetings in the fall when it comes to budgeting. Jim is on point for any kind of questions about finance, and those are all volunteer capacities there. So Ann, again, kind of roughly 10 hours a week. Doug, our Zimmerman, I kind of just quantified this at 5 hours a week too. I'm not even quite sure how much that actually is accurate, because sometimes I show up here before church starts and he's out there shoveling snow and putting salt down and whatnot. And what were we doing the other day where I showed up here and he was doing something and we started doing some kind of project together? We were cleaning out candles or what have you. So that's a totally volunteer position, and I think he likes that he has a cool title like sexton, but that's part of our tradition. Denise as well, in our Seasons for Souls ministry, one of our ministry leaders. I don't know if 3 hours a week is right. That's kind of depending upon the season, I suppose. Some seasons we don't have much going on in terms of seasonal celebrations. Maybe sometimes in the summer things are a little bit lower, and then other times, especially this kind of December to February kind of arc, and then the Easter Vigil, there's a lot more seasonal things that are going on with St. Nicholas and with Candlemas and with Epiphany and what have you. Then we got these big time volunteers, not like big time, but big time volunteers. The whole music committee is volunteer. The whole finance committee is volunteer. All the leaders in children's ministry, these sub-leaders below Dana that coordinate Sunday school and children's worship, those are all volunteers. Natalie Hill works sort of under Denise with respect to our coffee production time, whatever, but she coordinates all of that. That Sunday hospitality is a lot of time goes into that. Melinda Mahoney does our liturgical arts. This is the altar guild coordinating. Every single Sunday you show up and there's bread and there's wine here. Brad makes the bread, Melinda buys the wine, and she coordinates who sets it all up on a weekly basis. Mark Tater, our chancellor, when it came to our safeguarding stuff this last year, he put in a bunch of time with Jennifer and myself trying to make sure that this safeguarding policy was accordance with Illinois state law, and he was scrutinizing the codes and what have you in order to put in there these very important details that are there for us. Mark Kuppa mentioned in terms of AV, but also the whole AV team. They come in here and do stuff on Sunday morning, or they set up for special events, they set up our screens and whatnot. So there's a lot of time that goes into here. All unpaid, all volunteer, and some of these on a sort of a large level also. And then finally, just again, look at all this. Look at all these various people that do here. And this is like awesome. This is so wonderful to have so many people volunteering on a regular basis. And a church couldn't function, I think ought not function, on purely paid staff alone, for sure. That's absolutely the case here. But it is a lot of volunteers to manage and coordinate and rely on, which sometimes isn't always the best thing to be doing for sustainability's sake. Now, kind of taking a little bit of a turn here, that's kind of like, the numbers there, here's what's kind of going on here. What affects giving? How is it that we think about our ratios that come about here? I mean, I think there's really not any kind of like surprise. It's demographics and it's discipleship. That is, we are affected both by the kind of people we have here, the people who show here and what they can give, and it's also affected by our discipleship, how much we understand what our sort of role in participating in the ministry here in this church through our giving is. On demographics, here are a few things about our parish that shouldn't be anything surprising to you. Just by looking around here, we do have a lot of kids and teens around here, and they don't give, or they don't give much, you might say. But they do require a lot of us, and I think that's been a huge value that we have as a parish to care for all those that are coming after us. We do have a fair amount of college students. This is part of the kind of like attendance finagling we tried to like understand here with respect to how much college students should factor into like who is here in our parish. So as you know, we go down to one service around Christmas in the summertime because we lose a lot of college students. We lose a lot of like faculty who go on vacation. We lose other people who go on vacation as well. And so our attendance does this kind of like dip thing or whatever throughout the course, or up and down thing throughout the course of the year. But I will say this, we do have, with our new kind of parishioner registration format here, we've got our members, and we've got our parishioners. A parishioner has to like say, I'm going to be here for a couple of years. I'm going to be here kind of for the foreseeable future. And we do have college students that sign up for that because they're going to say, I'm going to be here for like the 2, 3 years, 4 years even that I'm going to be here in college. So if you were to take our like parishioner number, which you got to sign up for, if you were to take our membership number, which is more requirement in terms of signing up, as well as the children of parishioners and members, we end up with 277 people that are like, we're here at this church. Now, obviously, not 277 people don't show up on a Sunday morning on a regular basis. Our fall average was 228 because, how many of you, go somewhere in the course of the year and go on vacation, or you get sick, or what have you? That just happens, And so our attendance isn't always the best barometer of how many people are actually here. But of those people we are here, we've got kids, we've got college students. We also have young adults, and Aaron's going to talk a little bit, I think, about kind of like how income and giving relates here. And just as maybe most people in this room are not young adults, there's a few who you are, like you might remember your earning power was a lot smaller when you were in your 20s than it is when you were in your 40s and 50s and 60s. And just last week, we added 11 new members to our parish, which is awesome. It's great growth. All of them were under the age of 30. I find that really fascinating. I think it's really wonderful that we've got young people that are like wanting to make commitments to the church, they're wanting to be here, but their earning power and therefore their giving power is a lot less than someone who's like, in mid-career and what have you. On the opposite end, we have those who are retired who end up being on fixed incomes as well. It's a little bit sometimes trickier to figure out and calculate, well, how much am I going to be giving on the percentage of what I receive, because I'm no longer getting a salary, I'm getting my money from Social Security or my retirement and what have you. And I don't think everyone always kind of quite has the clearest understanding of how it is that affects what it is that we're giving. And I think it's wonderful. I love it that we have people who are on this end of the age spectrum or whatever. If we were only a parish with like just young families and kids, or only a parish with just those that are in the autumnal soul age group, that'd be very unbalanced. But it's one of the beautiful things, I think, of this parish. We have so many people at different life stages, and I think that actually really enriches our congregation quite a bit. But it also has some of its own sort of like challenges, you might say, with respect to those who are on the ends of these kind of earning spectrums. We also, as you probably know, don't have a lot of high earners to offset those who are in service sort of work or education or what have you. we don't have a ton of like finance bros or something like that who are making a ton of money that, their 10% goes a lot further than, someone else's 10%. And that's just fine. That's just some of the demographics. That's just the way that is there. But I think what that means, oh, sorry, you're going to come back to this. And
Oh,
I'm gonna
yeah.
talk about what that means. Sorry,
Yeah,
you had calculations.
Yeah, so I was
I
just
just got
going to say, just in terms of the big picture of things, at a population level for very large churches, when the church looks a lot like the community, I can guess what a church's giving level is if I look up the median household income and the either household size or the family size for that area. So imagine a world where median household income is $100,000. The average family size is 2 people, right? 100,000 divided by 2, that's 50,000. If they give 10%, that would be $5,000 per person, okay? And I can verify this because I actually have numbers from church salary going all the way back to 1991, and I modeled this. You can actually look up, what median household income and family size was. And so the top is sort of, if we use household size, which is smaller than family size, and the bottom is family size. And what you can see is the green line stays within those numbers. So at a population level, that's kind of what is driving giving. As far as at a small church and an individual church like us, it's really based on the demographics of our church, right? What is the median household income in our church? What is our family size? Spoiler alert, family size is larger at All Souls than the community at large and in the area. And so that's one of the factors that's sort of impacting our giving level at our church. So that's, and then, the big question mark, I'm just going to be honest, is, are we giving 10%? Are we giving 2%? Are we giving 3% on average across the church? That's also a big factor as well. So, pass it back to Father James.
Yeah, and I guess what the demographics mean there for us, unless as I think about it, I think this means that those who can give actually need to give more to reach the average. So if we have a fair amount of people who aren't able to give at that average rate, like kids and college students and retirees, what have you, then those of us who are looking for a place to give some money to those who actually need spiritual development and can't afford it for themselves, like, this is a place to do that. This is a place where we can actually support those who aren't able to give, to contribute to their own spiritual development. I mean, no child here in this church is able to give $2,000 or $2,400, a year for their own spiritual benefit. Same too with our college students, same too with probably our young adults. So those of us who can give need to give more if we're to reach that average, that sort of like average for a parish of our size. And the other sort of factor I think that affects giving here is just our discipleship. I think understanding of how a church works is part of this. We're trying to do that right now. Myself, I think I've been ignorant at times in my life about how is it that a church works, and it's just kind of like, oh, there's probably money for that somewhere, or like, oh, someone's going to give that, and not realizing like, oh, I'm that someone who has to like give some money to the church in order for that to like, play out or what have you. Just some kind of brief sort of thematic sort of things here with respect to our, kind of theology or giving an understanding of our lives here. I think we have to kind of, as Americans in the 21st century, fight against this like ownership mentality that we have of our stuff. This is so like hardwired into our conception of like capitalist consumers here that we're owners. We're owners, we're buyers, we hold stuff here, but I think a biblical perspective is that we're caretakers. It's not really our stuff here, All things come from you, O Lord, and to you, have we returned our gifts and offerings here. It's like, it's not our stuff. So how do we think about, being good stewards, good caretakers, good managers of God's stuff that we receive through our paychecks and then try to give here, as well. And that takes some embrace of God's provision for us. It takes like a trust, I suppose, to see God as providing for us in the place that we are, given the callings He's given to us in our jobs, in our vocations, in our retirements, and what have you. I think it also takes intentionality. It's not budgeting is not an accidental sort of thing, whether it's a church or an individual. When the vestry does their budgeting for the next year, it takes us months to do that. We start off in August and go all the way until December trying to plan, think about, pray through, get information, digest, ask for wisdom to get to the point where we put forth our budget. I don't always spend 6 months on my budget personally. How many of us like actually budget out with intentionality? Here's what my next year is going to look like. Here's what last year looked like. Here's what I'm spending on X, Y, and Z. And here's how I can be intentional about being a caretaker for these resources that God has given me, and build in there some kind of conception of what I want to give back to the church. And ultimately, I think it requires grace. It requires God to empower us to do something that feels rather unnatural. I think giving money away is that's kind of scary. Like that whether you're like evolutionarily inclined or what have you, it's like getting stuff is like what's natural here. Hoarding stuff is what's natural. Giving it away, that feels very like, who would do that sort of a thing, But that's what I think God calls us to do. And so we need grace. We need prayer. We need God to be able to empower us to do those things that he is calling us to do. And that, I think, is where we kind of have this opportunity. I think we have the opportunity to greatly increase the sustainability of our parish just by being average. Many people in Wheaton are overachievers. They want to be like A+ students or whatever. We just got to be like C students, and that would be a great increase to where we currently are.
Yeah.
I think when I saw that number there that Aaron had put forth there and said, like, if we just got to average, that'd be $125,000 more per year. Like, well, that's a full-time position and something here. That is quite a bit more. If we just got to average, that would greatly exponentially increase, I think, our ability to achieve that kind of sustainability, which I think then diminishes the reliance on doing those four things, like doing less and stretching our staff and increasing our volunteer base and et cetera, which then I think sets us up to be, as I said here, kind of sustainable. That sets us up to be able to move into the years and the decades into the future, and that I'm able to hand this parish off to the next rector in a way that doesn't have the same kind of challenges that we have at present or have had in the last few years. I think that's what I had there. Did you want to have that? And then questions too. We do have time for some questions and answers.
Yeah. So I wanted to show you guys this chart. So this is where All Souls is in terms of our per person budget. And then this is where we are in terms of our staffing ratios on the vertical axis. So you can see this negative curve right here. What this means is if we increasing our giving just by a little bit, because you can see we're kind of on the steep part of the curve here, it makes a huge difference in the staffing ratio of our church. You can actually sort of bake in all those numbers that I was telling you about. The mathematical formula, this is sort of what the end result looks like. And what it means is All Souls can afford to spend on a per person basis around $1,000 per person in terms of staffing right now. If our giving were to increase, you can see how steep this curve is, right? Just the smallest difference in our giving level at our church would make a massive difference in terms of the staff that we can hire and what we can pay. And so if we were down here, our giving was $5,000 per person, and we, bumped it all the way up to $7,000, it's going to make just a small difference in terms of what we can afford. But we happen to be on the really steep part of the curve here, and so if it drops below or it increases, it's going to make a huge difference in the size of our church. So I just kind of wanted you guys to see that right there. So does anybody have any questions? And then we'll wrap up.
Want to put a couple statements next to each other that we heard today. One is to fight against the ownership mentality that we're... One statement is to fight against the ownership mentality we're kind of swimming in. Want to give like 3 check marks to that one. I think that sits uncomfortably next to the assertion that the amount we give is the amount we can spend per person on ourselves.
What do you mean?
Well, the statement was made a number of times that in order to provide ourselves with spiritual benefits, we need to give a certain amount, and then we can use long division to find out how much that gives us per person. But if our resources are not ours, then our primary concern is what God would have happen with our resources and who would benefit. And I'm guessing a lot of those people would not be people who attend this church.
Oh, well, yeah, I would say I didn't talk about it, but the money gets spent on both the congregation and the community.
And so then we should look at our budget and see what that ratio is.
Yeah. Churches with lower giving have less money to do things to not just help themselves, but the community as well. Yeah. Where the bell's ringing, we're being told we're out of time. All right, well, let me wrap us up in prayer, and then we'll move on. Thank you, guys. Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you for the resources that you have gifted us, and we just thank you for the blessing and the privilege of being a part of All Souls. We just pray that you would continue to help us to be good stewards of all that you've entrusted us with. All these things we pray in your name. Amen.
Amen.